I'm Lisa, and this is the work I was made for.
Hi, guys. I am so excited for today's guest episode, an extraordinary conversation with a woman with an incredible career. We are sitting down with Maria Elena Lagomasino, the CEO of We Family Offices. She's a former CEO of JP Morgan Private Bank and an independent board member at little companies like Disney and Coca-Cola. She's also trustee of Carnegie Corporation of New York, and Mel has been recognized as Hispanic Woman of the Year. She advises some of the most powerful families in the world. But what makes her extraordinary is not just what she's done or where she's been. It's how she sees wealth, what it makes possible, what it demands. So let's get right into it.
Maria Elena, Mel, thank you for being here and welcome
Lisa.
to Open.
Thank you, Lisa. It's an honor.
So I was thinking a lot about this conversation because you've spent your life at the intersection of wealth, decision-making, and families. Yet so much about what determines whether wealth endures has very little to do with money. In my experience, and in this conversation, I wanted to start a little differently. Not with what you've done, but with what has shaped you. When you think about your relationship to wealth, not as an executive, but as a person, where does this story begin?
Oh, that one's really easy because I'm from Cuba and my family lost everything. And when we lost our financial well-being, we also lost family members that ended up, a diaspora in different places. We lost a whole way of life. We lost the ambition and expectations of, what our lives were going to look like. We lost a lot. And that had to do with financial wherewithal. It also has to do with your place in society. It has to do with your network. It has to do with a lot of things. But for me, the ability of really people being able to benefit from what they have created financially is critical, not because money is money, but because what it enables you to do. I mean, let me just give you an example. We used to be at my grandparents' house every single Sunday, and we used to see all my aunts and uncles and cousins and everybody else. And then when we had to emigrate and everybody went different places, there's cousins now that I would not recognize, right? Now, if we had had our financial wherewithal, maybe we would have been running around visiting each other from time to time. But everybody lost everything, and everybody ended up in different places, and those family ties were lost. And so it's not about money, it's what money allows you to do. And so I think that it is very important to be able to, if you have worked hard and you have had financial success, I think it's incredibly important to make sure that it's defended and protected. And there's a lot of players who want to put their hands on it, whether it's governments, relatives, whatever, thieves, okay? So I think defending capital is really important.
You've lived through that arc of having it, losing it, and rebuilding it in some way. I'm curious, how has your relationship to money, to wealth, changed or evolved emotionally?
Well, I don't know how it has evolved emotionally. I mean, money has never been that important to me. It's the ability for me to be free that is important to me. And I think you don't have to be wealthy, but I think if you're financially secure, it just gives you huge independence. You don't depend on somebody else. You're not really subject to somebody else's rules. You can do whatever you want. You can be whoever you want to be. You can be independent. You can be yourself. That's what I think is important.
So many times you mentioned what money actually allows. And in our experience in this space, conversations around money are rarely about money. They're oftentimes about something more, about decision-making, about power, about dynamics, about roles, about freedom. What is it about our conversation or our relationship to wealth, especially around the families that we serve, that makes it difficult to talk about it?
Well, I think money is a can be used as a control mechanism. And I think, if you behave, I'll leave you this. I remember I used to have a client, he's been gone a long time, but he used to change his will like every other month, depending on which kid he was happy with and which one he was unhappy with. By the way, he didn't listen to any advice whatsoever. And when he died, there was such a mess that his children ended up suing each other, and his grandchildren don't talk to each other, right? So unfortunately, money can be used as a control mechanism in families, and that's a very dangerous and horrible thing.
You've mentioned how you lived through an immigration story and how that impacted how you saw wealth as a vehicle. From everything you've lived at that moment in time, and I truly believe that I see families that our relationship early on from childhood, from our family, shapes the way we determine our lives and what we pursue. How has that shaped you? What has stayed with you from those initial experiences?
Well, I think really how important it is for me to always be financially independent and be in control of my financial self. And which, by the way, is something that I talk to, particularly to women, about all the time. Okay, is that sense of I'm in control of my financial self. I get my financial self. Mm-hmm. I get the decisions I have to make. I get the implications of those decisions, and I'm making them. I'm not abdicating to somebody else. And I'm independent. I think it's huge. It's hugely important.
You mentioned an area where there is such an opportunity. I remember this beautiful family in which 3 daughters had inherited a really big real estate portfolio. And their father, like many, many wealth creators that I know, believed he was doing the right thing for his children when he left operating companies in the hands of his sons and real estate portfolio in the hands of his daughter. And they tell me, Lisa, when we would go to New York and we would sit with our private wealth advisors, I remember very early on, as we walked in the door and we sat in the office, in the conference room, that they would only speak to my brothers. And they grew up, and that had shaped their confidence around making decisions around wealth. Many years later, that family, they sat down and they decided to restructure their assets together because they wanted to continue to join. And that allowed a space for them to step into education, understanding how to manage, how to make decisions, and ultimately being able to serve on their advisory board for their company. Is that something I'd love to know? What do you see? Have you also seen areas in which the gap is access, is preparation, and not necessarily competence?
Oh, for sure. But I view our role, actually, our value proposition, our promise, okay, to our clients is to help them make decisions, in a sense, feeling control, a sense of control with confidence and competence. That's actually what I see as my job. And so being able to work with the families, it has nothing to do with brains. It has nothing to do with intelligence, because most of these decisions that affect people's financial lives are common sense, right? But it has to be able you have to be able to work with families to help them understand where they are, where they want to go, what are the implications of the decisions that they need to make, and how comfortable do they feel with those implications? And then not make the decisions for them, but help them make it. And when they make them, review them over time and say, was that the right decision? Yes. Why? No. Why not? How do you memorialize that? How do you learn from that? Because it's a journey. It's not a destination. And these families have financial decisions that they have to make on a very regular basis. And you build it like a muscle. So I think that is absolutely the most critical thing for these families, regardless of whether the ones that created it or the ones that are inheriting it, whether they're male or they're female. I think it's a question of really taking charge of your financial life.
And when you speak about taking charge and process and reviewing, something comes up for me because I get asked this question a lot, and I cannot imagine how many times you've probably been asked this. What's the secret sauce? What's the secret sauce? What is the formula that allows for families in wealth to be able to pass down wealth and legacy from generation to generation? And so many families want to believe that having the right structure is going to be enough. And in our experience, and in the data shows that structure is rarely enough to sustain wealth from generation to generation, because a lot of our decisions are emotional decisions, are human decisions, right? So in your experience, what is it that families miss when they have to work together to be able to create a process, to be able to protect and grow
It's
assets
governance.
together?
It's governance. I mean, it's really an easy answer, because I do see this all the time. And it's governance is about decision making. So we talked about the fact that my role is to help families make decisions with a sense of control, confidence, and competence. That's what governance is. And typically with a family, at a particular point in time, decisions are being made by an individual or a couple of individuals, and it actually works. And very often it works. The problem is that wealth, if it's big enough, it's going to go. It's not going to end with the people making the decisions now. There's going to be a new group of people making decisions, right? And so the process that is in place to make decisions today is probably not going to work going forward. So how do you start thinking about that generational transition? How do you start involving and putting together a governance process while both generations are around to transition from one to the other? And when you do that, and it's really hard, it's very hard for the existing generation to give up decision-making power. It's hard for the new generation sometimes to have the interest or the engagement and step up or understand why it's so important. But when it works, it works. And to me, it's all about governance. If you have the right governance, chances are you have the structures are only should be a reflection of the governance. It's the governance that should drive.
You are preaching to the choir as governance. And the reality is, that every single family that I've had the pleasure to serve wants to achieve two things. They want to be able to grow assets and protect assets together. And the word assets is a very big one, because we have financial capital, relational capital, spiritual capital, not only businesses.
And human capital.
And they want to do that in a way that protects relationships. Yet so many families fail at that. In our experiences, the work really is behind the conversations that need to be had, so the governance reflects that. In your experience, what is that conversation that families usually most avoid?
Well, I think that the most difficult thing is for families to, both generations, to accept the fact that one generation is going to be gone. I think that's very hard.
Mortality.
I think that's a big one, because and it takes really openness on both sides to have that conversation and be able to be totally transparent with the existing, totally transparent. Say, here's what it is. Here are the things that I'm worried about. And to have the generation on the other side understand it, accept it with empathy, and understand that part of the way that they can help the existing leadership is actually to be able to have the open conversation and engage and work together to make sure that transition happens. I think it's very difficult. I remember my own mother, she kept wanting to talk to me about what would happen after her. And I kept resisting. Because I didn't want to have the conversation with my mother. I adored my mother. Even the thought of having the conversation was abhorrent to me. And then I realized I really was doing a disservice to her, because she needed to talk about it. And that as uncomfortable it was for me, I had to be open. I had to be listening to her. And actually, when I did that, it improved our relationship so many times over. It was one of the best things that ever happened.
What did it teach you?
Well, all the things that worried her, and that I could really try to help some of her anxiety, even just by listening to what it was. Never mind solving the problem, which were things that we needed to work on, but even just by listening and hearing her out and having a good conversation, it made a huge difference.
A lot of our work sometimes is just holding space for families to have a conversation in which they get to meet each other, usually where it's most difficult, but it's where it's most profound.
So what do you find is the toughest part? How would you answer the question you asked me?
I find that the conversations that are most difficult to have are the unnamed fears. As humans and as emotional beings, we all have our own shadows. Our unnamed fears of identity or belonging or loss or control. I often find that when we have control, when we have resistance in a system, when there is resistance, behind the resistance, there is an unnamed fear. And if we can step into naming that fear, it's liberating. For many, and I truly also believe that families and systems and sibling groups and cousin consortiums with the right structure get to identify and solve and create their own processes if they're coming at this with openness, with honesty. Because if not, porque si no, we're trying to solve something different. Nos pasa. O sea, vemos, and I'm going to switch, vemos herramientas como acuerdo de accionistas, como protocolos familiares, como trusts, como estructuras corporativas, todas diseñadas a través de tratar de nombrar y controlar y manejar algo que simplemente no se ha expresado. Y una de esas es una gran miedo a hablar sobre nuestra mortalidad. Y la mortalidad de aquellos seres que más queremos. Requiere muchísima valentía.
Yeah.
So,
agree.
Very true.
Yeah.
You talk about governance, and you've sat on boards like Disney and Coca-Cola. What is the difference between governance that works and governance on paper?
Implementation. You know, it's really interesting because I see a lot of families, they do a protocolo familiar and they decide that they're going to have, you know, a charter of how the family is going to work and all this stuff. And all the stuff is beautiful. And it took a ton of work. And they probably paid consultants a lot of money to help them do it, but then they don't do it. I'm doing work for one family now where I've looked at all the documents that they've done, and they are spectacular, the documents, okay? But they're not doing it.
Una belleza.
They're not implementing it.
Nada.
So they're making decisions without bringing in all the members of the family that need to be able to have an opinion. Okay? They are not documenting the meetings. They are not following up on the decisions X amount of time later after they've made the decisions and discussing them. So all the stuff that's in the document, it's perfect, but they're not doing it. So I think that governance requires process, and process is like building a muscle, and you have to keep exercising that muscle. And the more you do it, which is actually what happens at corporate boards, the more you do it, you have a regular schedule, you have a process, you have certain things that you have to do. You're constantly looking at how you can make things better. You're bringing everybody into the decision-making process. You're preparing, you know, you're doing a lot of stuff that's just very regular process-oriented stuff. You're building that governance muscle, and you're learning. And so when the families can do that and they implement, you know, a public board has no choice but to do all that stuff. But a family, they can say, oh, we're too busy, we have a wedding, you know, we didn't make the meeting, something else happened. And so for me, that rigor of implementing those rules. It's not about the rules, it's about the implementation.
It is the consistency. It is the muscle building. It is the practice.
Yeah, it's a practice.
It is the
The more you practice, better you get.
I remember a beautiful family that I served that they're like, guys, we did a beautiful family protocol and we took a picture and we hung it on the wall and we have this beautiful leather embossed protocol, and it has served us for nothing because nothing in that was a process. It was just a product. It was just a moment in time.
Yep.
Your life, your career has also been about consistency. You rose through structured institutions without being confined to a particular role. What has allowed you to expand throughout your career like that?
I've never changed in terms of what I want to do as a career, which was really to help families be sustainable and successful over time, multi-generationally. That's always been my thing. So that has never changed, what I wanted to do. But I think what I've always wanted to do is to nurture myself with many different fountains of learning. So my board work was absolutely instrumental, has been instrumental in helping me understand governance in many ways, which I then can translate into the work we do with families. The work that I do that I serve on the investment committee of Carnegie Corporation, for example, really helps them with the investment work that I do with my clients. I think it's so important as a person to keep growing, not just because you're reading more books or whatever, but you're connecting with different people that have different networks, that have different viewpoints, that have nothing to do with what you do. But you're open to talking with them and learning from them and getting different perspectives.
Has there ever been a moment throughout your career that you chose not to stay in a lane, in an expected lane?
Well, I left the bank. That was unexpected, but I felt it was something that I had to do. I was in a place where I was very conflicted with what my values were telling me and what actually the bank at that point wanted to do. And I decided my values have to win every time. So,
How have your values led you to where you are today?
Oh, everything. Everything is about my values. It's about what I believe in. Yeah, everything.
One of the things that you've mentioned is that today at this firm, one of your core values is also opening space for women women leaders in families to step into that ownership of the decisions that they make. How important is it today and for the future?
Oh, I think it's critical. And I think we're not there yet. I mean, I still see particularly young women feeling that somehow they'll leave it to somebody else. They'll leave it to their husband. They'll leave it to their dad. And they find that their eyes glaze over around some of this stuff. And they don't want to engage. And I think it's so important to engage. When they do, it's fantastic.
One of the things that is a purpose behind this podcast is that, in my experience, family systems are complex, beautiful living systems in which many times there's unseen roles. And one of the unseen roles that I've had the privilege to witness is so many women that have been the backbone of emotional capital of their families, that have supported family business leaders, that have cared for legacy and for traditions and for family glue. What happens when those roles are recognized? What happens when, in your experience, women can step into roles in which they are able to be seen and are able to make decisions?
You mean financial decisions?
Yes. What have you seen in your clients?
Well, there's two different things I would tell you. There's a whole group of women that I've worked with over the years that have, for some reason, had to all of a sudden be able to do that. And they'd never done it before because they had very financially successful fathers, husbands, or whatever. And so these are women where they got divorced, the husband died, the husband got dementia. Something happened where all of a sudden, almost overnight, almost like they were thrown into this pool without knowing how to swim. Okay. And it was hugely complicated. And I have seen these women over time and frankly, with the right team around them, completely emerge into people who are totally in control of their financial lives, are able to do so many things that they didn't know that they could do, feel so confident and so in charge. It's such a beautiful thing. I have worked a lot with women like that, which is fantastic. I think where you still have another family member that is still very involved and sometimes is reluctant to hear her voice, it's more complicated because it becomes a question of how does she feel entitled to be able to have her voice heard. And that's coaching and helping. But when they do, they make a huge difference.
I'm curious to hear some of those stories in which things do not go according to plan. And I'll share one of mine. Early on, a great mentor, told me that if you don't understand emotions, then you don't understand decisions. And if you don't understand humans, you don't understand business. And I've carried that with me in the work that I do. And for a lot of the clients that I work with, I know that once we have access to certain tools, then they're able to open up conversation, access conversations that will get them to that shareholder agreement that they need, to that exit strategy that they need to plan, to that board of directors with independence, even though we thought that was going to test our identity or our knowledge. And yet I also I'm reminded of groups and families and sibling partnerships of Latin American men in which we've brought those resources and it hasn't been possible. Like we've not been able to access. Specifically, I was working with a founder who was in his late 90s, and he could identify his control that had shaped not only his daughter, his only daughter, but that has shaped all of his grandchildren. It was such a centralized power in which the whole identity of that family system was based on him and was based on the business. That was what was valued. And even though he was able to name it, he wasn't able or willing or at that moment in time to change. So the work wasn't really about him, but it was about supporting his daughter and their grandchildren and be able to, with acceptance, with love, but also with radical accountability, making the decisions that they could. Not necessarily a failure, but a shift. What has happened for you?
I've had lots of situations where there is a real reluctance from the existing generation to shift and allow the voices of the next generation or of their spouse or whatever into the game. Right. That clearly is true. And it has to do with people's sense of themselves and their importance and their ego and everything else. The issue is that the problems from it, usually where they really show up, is in the following generation. So, and unfortunately, I think the worst of these is where you have usually it's a patriarch. The patriarchs say, I don't care what happens after me. It's the Louis XVI thing. Louis XIV. Après-moi la deluge.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? Que se peleen, let them, it's not my problem anymore. And so it's that abdication of responsibility in terms of what you need to do to prepare the next generation of owners that I think is really tragic. But it exists. And then all you can do is try to help the next generation as they try to, grapple with it.
If there is one thing, si hay una sola cosa que le pudieras decir a patriarcas latinos familiares para poder apoyar, a proteger y crecer sus legados familiares, ¿cuál sería?
Well, how do you preserve what you built? I mean, it's your legacy. You want to preserve what you built. You want to be sure that this goes on. That is the greatest validation of all your work, is to preserve it. And the only way you're going to preserve it is by getting the next generation of owners ready and making sure that they understand how important it is to be stewards and to preserve it.
So opening up the conversation.
Well, making it personal. Yes, but making it personal to their own success. That's, if at the end of the day they were a big success and the next generations, are a big failure and everything goes to hell in a handbasket, that says something about the patriarch. It says something about them.
I truly believe that wealth is a vehicle for good.
Me too.
And part of why I believe that families in wealth have a not only distinct responsibility, but a wonderful privilege is because we get to impact our communities, our societies, our economies. Part of what this firm stands for is putting values and family values at the center of their strategic plan. What does it take, and how can families create lasting and meaningful impact?
Well, let's start with what I think are the 3 keys to a family being successful in terms of the sustainable family legacy over time and their wealth. And I think it's 3 things. And the first one is, what is their self-identifying set of values? If they talked about the values that the family has in common and shares together, what are those? And how do they express those? How do they express those through their wealth?
How do they express those?
How do they express those values? How do they express those values in terms of their conversations, in terms of the way they deal with each other? How do they express those values in the workplace? How do they express those values in their communities? How do they express those values in their philanthropies? So those values really need to be the guiding light and the core to all the decisions that they make. And I think when they're very aware of those values and the importance of those values, then chances are that the impact, because there's no bad values, all values are good, right? When they really act according to those values, then the impact is definitely going to be a positive, constructive value.
A lot of our work with values, it's funny. I remember when working with families and like, we're doing a value system, but values are not what you see when you walk into the company and there's a plaque and there's like somos, mission, vision, and values. Having a family uncover what their actual values are, I hear you say. And then the second thing is, how do we model them? Like, how do those values are actually in action? How are we permeating every single thing that we touch as a family in alignment with what we believe is important?
Exactly.
How are you seeing families of wealth create lasting impact? What are you seeing?
Well, it depends on whether they really, what are the concentric circles. So you can create lasting impact around your own family. You can create it around your own community, or you can create it in the world at large. And I've seen it done all. But again, I think it goes to your values and the fact that you want to exercise them in whatever way you can to make the world a better place.
I love that you mentioned the fact that there's that 3 circles of inference of an impact. And I truly believe that sustainability and philanthropy begins at home. One of the things that has been more rewarding is having a family learn and understand that, for example, I remember this family in which their value was it's part of their vision statement, is creating stewards, and that began with their self. And every single, not even their mission statement, their protocol, where they invested within their family education and retreat committee, their annual events were for many years anchored, thank you, in developing great human beings. Having a family that had access, no matter the path that any of those chose, first having that access to creating great human beings. And that in turn allowed for a lot of acceptance. There were musicians, there were artists, there were business leaders, there were finance experts in the room, but they were all stewards. They were all great owners of a 5th generation family enterprise. But they truly believed that part of how they created value was understanding and upholding the self. And that in turn created so many, there are more than 2,000 family members. And you can see that today in 5th generation.
Fantastic.
And it's so beautiful to watch. What has your work throughout your life required of you personally? ¿Qué te ha pedido esta trayectoria?
Well, a lot of long days and hard work, but it's very rewarding. It's very rewarding.
A lot of what I felt that this work is asking for me, I come at this from a law. I'm a lawyer first. I did corporate and financial law. And then I decided to do an MBA. Very left-brainer. I get to have answers. We're here to problem solve. Life is black and white. And as I leaned into this work and this space, understanding families, understanding systems, understanding concepts like wealth, like legacy, a lot of what is taken from me is shifting from thinking about problem solving to thinking about polarity management, dilemmas. And it's also taken from me personally, deconstructing an identity in which I've had to become a lot more calm, a lot more grounded, a lot more open to listening, a lot more open to not having all the answers.
I don't think we have the answers. I think most of the time the families have the answers. That's why I say that the answer is asking the right questions. I don't think that a lot of these issues are for us to solve. It's for them to solve. You just have to try to understand and try to guide them there so they can find their own solutions and understand the implications of the decisions they're making.
I agree.
It's not about us. Okay, this is what I always say to my people. It's not about us. It's about them. It's not how smart we are. It's about how we can help them feel smart. That's the role. It's a role that has to do with serving. It really is very much supporting behind the scenes for people to be able to be the best that they can be and make the best decisions they can make. But it's their decisions. It's not ours.
Of all of the roles that you've lived, which one makes you most proud?
The work that I do now, the work I do with families. I think, and I realized, we were talking about this before, but I realized that basically for me to make a difference, I can only actually make it one family at a time. But that's okay.
What does that mean? How does that impact how you choose the families that you serve?
Usually I'm serving a family because if I'm serving a family, it's because I have connected with them. We have been involved in some conversations long before I start doing the work. If I don't feel that I'm the right person, I usually delegate to somebody else who I think can make the connect. The emotional connection is incredibly important.
The emotional connection is incredibly important.
Mm-hmm.
This is deep emotional work.
Very. Yeah.
What have you come to understand about yourself doing this work?
I don't know. That's a very tough question.
Is there something that has surprised you?
No, I think the only thing is that I get older. It's very, one of the things that has surprised me about myself, but also about others, is as you get older, you get bolder. And you can actually take more risk in terms of telling some of our clients, for example, things that they don't want to hear. But I can have those conversations. I'm quite comfortable having those conversations. I don't think I would have been so comfortable, 30 years ago. I think it took experience, etc. Because at the end of the day, one of the important, I think, things in the work we do is that you have to have a lot of courage. You have to have courage to tell people things that they absolutely do not want to hear. You have to be willing to get fired because you're telling people something that they don't want to hear. And you might be absolutely wrong in what you're telling them, but you still have to have the courage to tell them. And so I think that that's one of the good things is that as you get older in this profession, you get bolder, and it's okay.
One of the things that you've highlighted is that it was important for you that when you service from a place of no conflict of interest. Can you explain why that's so important to you?
Because it's all about them. It should never be about me. It has to be, you have to have undivided, I really believe that to do this business, and to help families, you have to have undivided loyalty to that family. You cannot have anything getting in the way that if they go right or they go left, it's better for you or your company. It's got to be what's right for them. It's about them.
And it is the courage to understand that we are here to voice whatever needs to be voiced at that moment in time.
Right.
With a lot of love, with a lot of compassion, pero dispuesto a que de esa puerta salgamos votados.
Yeah, exactly.
En todo momento. So we want to end with rapid fire questions.
Okay.
These can be as short as you want.
Okay.
Are we ready?
Sure.
Are we ready to shoot?
Sure.
A book that changed how you think.
A book that changed, oh God, so many. Probably War and Peace.
War and Peace. What would Mel tell her 16-year-old self?
Go for it.
Go for it, baby.
Believe in yourself. Go for it.
Where were you at 16?
Where was I? I was in Connecticut. We had left Cuba 5 years before that.
One thing families misunderstand about wealth.
That it's not about the money. It's what the money means, what the money allows you to do.
It's what it allows you to do. What does enough mean to you?
Enough to do whatever I want to do. That's a really good question. This is a rapid fire one, but this is one of the big differences I see with women when they are making their financial decision. They're not trying to beat the next guy. And this is a gross generalization, but I see it over and over again. Their objective is to have enough to do whatever they want to do. It's not to beat the other guy. That's not the objective. It's not to be the smartest investor on the planet. It's to have enough to do whatever I want to do.
So women, in your experience, understand that word differently.
They do. They understand in the investment space, they tend to be much more focused on, okay, these are my objectives. This is what I want to have done. Therefore, I know that I have to put the money to work in this way so that I can get that done. Not so that I can beat the next guy.
And I'm sure it has a direct impact on well-being.
Yes. Well, of course, because it's about the self-confidence that they can do whatever they want to do.
Como siempre, las mujeres tomando decisiones claras. What's one decision that you made quickly and you knew it was right?
Starting this company.
It was a quick decision.
It was very quick.
How old were you?
63. So, I have a lot of experience.
What is one thing that people might be surprised to see in your daily routine?
In my daily routine, I work out every day.
Work out every day. And you drive.
I drive.
And you still drive. I cannot wait to stop driving. When you think, and as a final question, Mel, when you think about your life and your work, what feels most meaningful to you?
I think the difference that I have made in those families that I've been able to help.
The difference that you've made in the families that we've been able to help. Thank you.
No, thank you, Lisa.
Thank you for your time.
Always fun.
This has been a great conversation. And thank you for being so open.
No, of course.